Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, everything in between. My name is Sherman, and this is Wingin. Do you notice anything different? We're gonna call this season 2. You know, there's a couple episodes finding the footing, and now we're making things happen. So to kick off season 2, we're not just talking about one species, but we're talking about a group of species, and we're talking about ducks. And I think something that happens when you're talking about ducks is, if you Google ducks, it happens, you get this guy, this is a mallard, and it's certainly become the poster child for ducks, right? Which is fair, that's a duck. I think that comes from its abundance, that everybody sees mallards everywhere, mallard, duck, boom, good to go. But there's a whole world to them. So I want to talk about some classification tools that you can use to divide ducks into 2 main groups, and throw a couple species at you that maybe if you see them you'll think, you know what, that was what that skinny guy was talking about. Before we do that though, I want to lay down some ground rules. What do we mean when we say duck? If you think of a bird that's sitting on the water, okay, but now you're talking about loons, and you're talking about cormorants, and you're talking about grebes and coots, and before you know it, you're talking about auks and puffins, and okay, we're really stretching what we're talking about, so let's fine tune it a little bit. We'll say waterfowl. Okay, what about waterfowl? Waterfowl, now you're talking about the family of Anatidae, and that includes geese, and it includes swans. I don't really want to go that route either. I think for our intents and purposes, we just gotta rock with, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So when it comes to ducks, there are 2 main groups. There are the dabbling ducks and the diving ducks. And what that means is it has to do with how they forage. So here's a mallard, like we talked about, and this is a mallard foraging for food. Adorable. But what it's doing is it's tipping its body 90 degrees, and its bill is now under the water, and it's nipping at little fish and plants and bugs that it can find in its direct vicinity. Something to look at, and perfect, I'm going to switch over to this guy. Does he look familiar at all? He's right here. This is an American widgeon. Also an example of a dabbling duck. And what we see, this is very important, is the placement of the legs, right? So a dabbling duck that will tip its body like that, it has legs right in the middle of its body. So what that's going to enable it to do is walk on land, which is huge. Diving ducks, their legs are all the way back here, and we're going to talk about that, but that's going to pose a couple of problems and a couple of abilities that diving ducks have that dabbling ducks don't, and vice versa. Before we talk about that though, I want to throw at you my favorite dabbling duck. I'm going to move into the corner of shame just because I want you guys to see this. This is the northern pintail. I think this is just an incredible looking bird. The tail and the little crest on the back of the head and the blue bill, I love it. I think it's awesome. Northern pintail. If you see one of these, freak out. So, switching gears over to the diving ducks. This is called canvasback. Canvasback is an example of a diving duck. Like I said, its legs are going to be in the back of its body. And what that's going to enable it to do is, while it's diving, looking for the food, so diving ducks aren't going to tip their body. They're going to go all the way under, and they're going to look for the bigger fish. Diving ducks tend to be larger because they can dive, they can get lower, they can get bigger fish that are hiding more. So because their legs are in the back of their body, what it enables them to do is, sort of like a frog, they can kick their legs for propulsion, and they can really be agile under the water. And that's very important when you're trying to catch big fish. You want to be as agile as possible. Something we see, though, a difference between diving and dabbling ducks, is when they go to take off, the diving ducks, so this is a mallard, like we saw at the beginning, it's a dabbling duck, and a canvasback, we just saw a diving duck. When they're taking off from the water, the mallard so dabbling ducks also have broader wingspans. And between the broader wingspans and the legs in the middle of the body and an overall smaller shape, they can take off right from the water on a dime. They hear a noise, boom, poof, they're gone. Diving ducks, on the other hand, they're stockier, their legs are way in the back, they've got slightly shorter wings because they don't really need to focus on flying so much. they have to what's called taxiing. And you can kind of see it there in that picture. They have to run along the water. And so what they're doing is they're gaining momentum as they're going, and they have to work a little bit harder to lift off. And that does cause some, it's called a deleterious trait, when there's a character trait derived from evolution that kind of has some negative side effects. It's a deleterious trait because what you see is diving ducks sometimes will land on a body of water that's too small, and they can't taxi a great enough distance to build the momentum. You actually see it with loons more than diving ducks, but there's conservation efforts where people will just monitor these small ponds and go check any loons get stuck over here. Nope, good to go. And that's a job, wildlife ecology. So that's something pretty interesting. Now now that we have those two established, I just want to hit you with a couple of different species. These are mostly sea ducks. First one is called a harlequin duck, which also, it was one of the first birds that I saw when I got into it. I read it in a book. That's a Pokemon. Like, we're all on the same page there. That's crazy. I mean, they call it a harlequin duck because of the plumage, because it looks, kind of clown-like. We love anthropomorphizing. Harlequin duck. Next, we have the Oregon ducks, who had a pretty poor season, and this is the king eider, which is a diving sea duck. Next time you see a duck and you watch it for a couple of minutes, maybe start to think, okay, is it diving or is it dabbling? And once you make that distinction, okay, so maybe I can derive that it's eating bigger fish. Maybe I can derive that it can get stuck. There's just there's a dynamic knowledge base to be found here. With that being said, my name is Sherman, and this is Wingin' It.